Welcome to my channel and to a new podcast. It is titled Trump's Import Tariffs, the Whole Truth. Before we start, a quick note. If you are interested in the topic, you should read Dr. Polleits BOOM BUST REPORT. All information can be found at www.boombustreport.com. And now let's get started with Trump's import tariffs, the whole truth. On April the 3rd, 2025, US President Donald J. Trump fulfilled what he promised during his campaign. He imposed import tariffs. And they are hefty. A 34% tariff on Chinese goods, which brings the total tariff on Chinese products to 54%, 20% on goods from the European Union, and 10% on goods from other regions such as the United Kingdom and Australia. By the way, it's not like the US is doing something that others are not. For example, the German tariff on imported cars from the US is 10% plus a 19% import VAT, meaning the total cost for German buyers of American cars is 29%. Anyway, after the announcement of US import tariffs, there were significant stock market losses, bond yields dropped, the prices of precious metals and crude oil plummeted, and the US dollar depreciated significantly against the euro. Many politicians, mainstream economists, and business representatives are raising alarms, warning of a recession, unemployment, and the collapse of the international trade system. But is this justified? What will come out of the US tariff policy? I want to give you some answers. So let's start from the beginning and ask, what is an import tariff? An import tariff is, economically speaking, a tax imposed on goods imported from abroad. The consumer is, in the end, responsible for paying the tariff. An import tariff makes goods more expensive. Let's say a pair of sneakers imported from China into the US was previously sold for $100. Now the government imposes a 20% import tariff. Consequently, Americans will have to pay $120 for the sneakers. The $20 tariff goes to the government. What are the consequences of an import tariff? Well, it makes imported goods more expensive, making them less competitive compared to domestically produced goods. This, in turn, leads to a shift in demand. The demand for imported goods decreases, while the demand for domestically produced goods increases. As a result, foreign producers suffer and domestic producers benefit. Why is there so much criticism of Trump's import tariffs? Well, they create winners and losers. For example, small and medium-sized businesses in the US are winners, as are their employees. Foreign producers and workers suffer. Even the business model of many large companies is affected. Profits earned by shifting production abroad to benefit from cheap wages and then importing goods to the US shrink or disappear. Generally speaking, import tariffs have negative effects. Domestic producers get used to the protection from foreign competition, making them less efficient, leading to less innovation, weakening the economy. Or, the international division of labor is weakened when a country imposes import tariffs. Goods are no longer produced where they can be made most cheaply. And this harms consumers who get fewer goods and have to pay higher prices. And foreign politicians retaliate and impose their own tariffs, with harmful effects for all consumers, international trade, and the quality of relations between countries. China, for example, has already announced a 34% tariff on US imports. In this sense, import tariffs, like any other tax, reduce welfare that would otherwise come from a fully free international division of labor and free trade. However, Trump's import tariffs also have an aspect that is currently not recognized or being overlooked, and this aspect can definitely be seen in a positive light. To start with, there is the fact that the US import tariff makes it more attractive for foreign producers to reallocate their production to the US, sell their produce to Americans, and export goods from the US to the rest of the world. This incentive for moving production to the US gets even stronger if the Trump administration ensures the lowest corporate taxes worldwide, which is also something they plan to do. Taken together, the US will most likely become a magnet for capital and talented people worldwide. This is undoubtedly positive for growth and employment in America. Additionally, before the election, President Trump had advocated for eliminating the federal personal income tax and simultaneously, to compensate for the loss of tax revenue, imposing tariffs on imported goods. Could this work? In 2024, federal income tax revenues amounted to $2.4 trillion, while imports into the US totaled $3.9 trillion. To compensate for the loss of income tax revenues, the import tariff would have to be set at almost 75%. It's worth noting that imports into the US, which would become more expensive due to tariffs, accounted for about 14% of the US GDP in 2024. At the same time, the planned elimination of the income tax would increase the purchasing power of US citizens. In theory, this would raise private consumption expenditures by about 11% per year. Furthermore, employment in the US would rise, as there is a greater incentive to work without any personal income tax. So replacing the income tax with tariffs could succeed. Overall, there is reason to assume that growth and employment in the US will be benefiting from import tariffs if they are combined with a reduction in other taxes. As a matter of fact, the effects of US tariffs are not limited to America. US import tariffs will put severe pressure on other regions of the world. For example, capital can be expected to be moved from Europe and Asia to the US. Regions from which capital is leaving will have to counteract if they don't want to lose economic power. Tax cuts, deregulation, and reducing the size of the state will be necessary. The impact of US import tariffs could even lead to a breakup of the European Union. The European Union is a cartel of states, and individual countries will have a stronger incentive to break away and position themselves economically more advantageously than the EU allows. China, too, will come under pressure. Perhaps most important, US import tariffs help to push back the deep state. And here's why. If tariffs lead to more production in the US, imports will decline, and so import tariff revenues will shrink, as tariffs can't be indefinitely increased unless a country becomes 100% self-sufficient. This in turn forces the reduction of state spending unless other taxes are raised and/or the deep state is financing its spending through increased borrowing. In other words, Trump's tariffs have an inherently state-diminishing dynamic. So, in this sense, import tariffs that replace income taxes are an instrument to shrink the deep state and financially dry it out. Trump seems to be inspired by the period before 1913, a time when there was no federal income tax in the US, and, by the way, no US central bank. The state was very small, nearly irrelevant to the daily lives of citizens, and its revenues mostly came from tariffs and fees, accounting for only about, say, 2 or 3% of GDP. From this perspective, Trump's agenda has the potential to shrink the deep state and everything that goes with it, bringing the American dream back to life. thereby especially moving America away from an aggressive foreign policy. It is also a blow against globalism, the idea that people should not shape their destiny within a system of free markets, but rather be controlled by the state actors and their cronies. In this way, Trump's agenda is also a blow against the deep state and a liberating strike. At the end of the day, however, and I must add this, all of this is, of course, not enough to secure freedom and prosperity. What is needed is enlightenment, an enlightened understanding by as many people as possible that the state, as we know it today, is the central problem that stands in the way of peaceful and productive coexistence, both nationally and internationally. What is required is the intellectual effort to remove the state, as we know it today, from the equation. What are the consequences for the US dollar, interest rates, stock markets, and inflation in the long term? Answers to these and other questions can be found in Dr. Polleits Boom and Bust Report. You can find all the information on my website www.boombustreport.com. I look forward to your visit, and now I want to thank you for your attention.